Hey everybody, this was just a quick video about some of the practicalities concerned with in-person labs. So you'll be doing an in-person lab every other week, and the labs will be occurring in room 103 in the library and science building, and that's on the level that's underneath the library, so the lower level, the basement level. And these labs are going to be taking place Wednesday 2:30 to 4:30. All right, so let's just kind of like go through very systematically what some of the requirements are and how to make sure that you don't end up sort of turning up for lab and then having someone say to you, sorry, can't do lab, and you're losing a couple of percentage points off your grade. So what you want to do before you turn up to the lab is figure out what group you're in. And this is either going to be A or B, and I sent out a small video that allows you to see what group you're at, that shows you how you can find out what group you're in. And then you want to make sure you know what assignment you are doing that week and if you actually need to come in to the lab. Once you've done that and you've determined that you are coming into the lab, you want to read everything closely. So there's normally just an assignment that's about the lab that has a few documents in there, and you want to read those documents that are contained in there, and then there will be a notebook assignment. For every in-person lab, there is a Prelab assignment which you complete in your laboratory notebook, and basically what this comes down to is writing a purpose and a procedure for that day's lab. And I always say allow about 1 hour to get that done in a kind of a relaxed way, and you can send me a draft of that if you want. That sometimes it's nice to do that in the first week when you're a little kind of anxious about what's required, and then maybe you can become a little bit more relaxed about that. You know, if it takes you 20 minutes and you've allowed an hour, have a nap. The other thing you might do as part of your sort of like pre-lab assignments is you might consider preparing data tables in your lab notebook so that you're not doing that on the fly in the lab. Of course, you want to make sure that you have appropriate clothes for being in the lab. You want to make sure that you've got your appropriate materials for being in the lab. And this sounds really dumb, but have a plan for getting to the college on time. Now, the reason that I say that is, we start on time and we begin with a pre-lab safety lecture and a pre-lab talk where we work through how the materials and equipment operate. And so if you miss that, you're not able to do the lab. So it is important that you kind of plan to get to the college on time. So finding what group you're in is pretty straightforward. You just go to the people menu in the sidebar, and then you'll be able to see that there are two tabs. Click the labs group tab and then expand out the menu items for group A and B, and you'll be able to figure out what group you're in. Okay, so once you've got what group you're in, that's not going to change for the quarter. Then you want to look in the module for the week, and you want to see whether group A or group B has an online or in-person lab. And if you're in group B in week 2, you have an in-person lab, and you need to be planning for coming into the college. So that's it. If you have an online lab, then, relax and forget about, planning to come into the college. So once you've kind of figured out that you have to come into the college, that you have an in-person lab, you want to click on the lab assignment and read everything closely. So for this first week's assignment, there are 2 documents that you want to read. One is a description of the experiment, and then the other is the lab report. So it gives you some guidelines here about completing the lab report, which is ultimately what you're going to upload and get graded. So in getting ready for the lab, you don't need to sort of like be overly concerned about this stuff here about what your report needs to look like, but you should read the report so you know what you're going to be doing in the lab and what you might expect. So If you want to print out these documents, you can, and you can print them in the library for free. Now, when it comes to the report, which is what you'll actually submit, you can either write your answers onto a printed copy of the lab report, or you can reproduce something that looks similar to the lab report. If you do kind of make your own copy of it, just keep everything organized. Now, the second assignment that you have to do if you've got an in-person lab is you need to complete your lab notebook. So for lab notebooks, we're just going to use a composition book. So it does need to be a bound book that everything is going to go into. And there are some extensive instructions here. There are a few things here to keep in mind. You're going to be submitting your lab notebook as a PDF each week. And all of the entries in the lab notebook need to be made in pen. This is a sort of a professional standard for STEM people. And there's going to be 4 parts each week. There's going to be a purpose, a procedure, a data section, and a conclusion. So 4 sections to the lab notebook every time you do an in-person lab. And the important thing to keep in mind is that the first 2, the purpose and procedure, they are completed before the lab starts. So we'll talk about what they look like in another video, but just keep in mind that a part of your getting ready for coming in for the lab is going to be to complete the purpose and procedure. The data section is done in the lab as you're working through the lab, so that's pretty straightforward. You're just going to do that, as you go along. It doesn't take a lot of work. And then the conclusion is done after you've finished the report. So don't worry about writing a conclusion in the lab or anything like that. You want to be doing that after you've finished the report. And there's a good reason for that is it'll be trivial if you wait until you've done all of your calculations and you actually understand how all of the bits go together. All right, so let's move on. The last little bit here is that, you want to get yourself kind of organized in a real practical sense. So you need specific clothes, you need a few materials, and you need to make sure that you get to the college on time for lab. So as far as clothes are concerned, you need shoes that cover your toes. And so you can't wear kind of like open-toed shoes but then have socks underneath, or any kind of, or shoes with like huge holes in them and things like that. They need to be legit shoes that cover your toes. You need to be covered in sort of material, we always say ankles to neck. So we're going to avoid like sort of like crop tops. We're not going to wear shorts. We're not going to wear like knee-high skirts or anything like that. We're looking ankles to neck. And this is kind of sounds bizarre, but chemically resistant pants has become an issue. So those like lycra yoga pants and tights and stuff like that. Well, it turns out that when you spill some of the chemicals we'll be using on those pants dissolve. So we're going to ask you to avoid wearing leggings of any description, just because they're not sort of resistant enough to withstand what we're doing, and you end up with giant holes in your clothing, and then it's in contact with your skin a lot more than what we would want it to be. Similarly, like pants with like large tears in them and stuff, we don't want you turning up with that. If you've got long hair, it does need to be tied back, and this is mainly because there's people using flame in the lab, and hair burns very well. We do have some hair ties, but they're not the same as your own. They may not be comfortable for you, so it's probably best just to bring your own hair tie. So that's the clothes bit. Materials, you're going to need a bound composition book. Just go to the dollar store, grab one. You want a bunch of pens. We don't use pencil in our lab notebooks. That's a matter of professional practice. This is original scientific experimental data. We don't want any accusations when we're a STEM professional that data got altered after the experiment. We're already in a climate where everybody is, not everybody, where there is a strong anti-science sentiment, where people are looking to fault scientists for what they've done wrong. And part of what we do is all experimental data is recorded in pen at the time that it was measured directly into a lab notebook, and that helps keep that legitimate. You're going to want a calculator. You can use your phone, or you can use a emulator for a scientific calculator on your phone. I would rather use just a scientific calculator. You got to get used to using one anyway, because we are going to be returning to school at some point. And kind of an optional extra is it is nice to have a ruler for making tables. Okay, so that's that bit. This is about the plan to get to college on time. We're going to be starting promptly at 2:30 p.m. each week. This will be like some safety information, some information about how to use equipment, just a general overview of the experiment. That's how we're going to start. You need to be there for that, and you need to be there like ready to listen. You shouldn't be completing pre-lab requirements during that time either. And it sounds really mean, but people that aren't there for that, they aren't able to do the lab. We just don't let you guys do the lab, and you end up losing a couple of percentage points by missing a lab. So please, please, please make sure you're there on time, and also on time ready to roll. You need to be ready to kind of hit it when we get there. We only have 2 hours to get through this stuff. So plan to arrive with enough time for bad traffic, parking, needing to get lunch, going to the bathroom, getting lost because you've never been to the basement of the library and science building before. All of those things be aware of, can really kind of easily delay you by 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then you're in trouble and you can't do the lab. All right. So just have a plan for that, and you can adjust accordingly, but for the first week, perhaps be super cautious. Okay, so what do the assignments look like? So there's one where it's just kind of like labeled lab, and it says in person, and like I said, there's some background information in one document, and then there's the report that you're actually going to download complete, and that'll be your submission. There's some information about some of the quality standards expected for the report right here. So before you get to the lab, you should read, any documents that's in the lab section thoroughly. If you want, you can print them at the library for free. We do have computers in the lab, so you can always bring these documents up and read them, or some people bring them up on their phone, but we don't have printers in the lab. Of course, you can leave the lab at any point in time and go and print them if you want, but it's nice to get that organized beforehand, all right? So this stuff here, like I said, you can worry about reading that, once you begin preparing your report for submission. The notebook, you have to be a little bit more prepared in advance for. So you will submit the notebook as a PDF by the due date. And all the important thing is that you need to complete the purpose and procedure before you start the lab. And so my recommendation is give yourself about an hour to get that done. And you might consider sending me a draft. Right now, I'm gonna initial your purpose and procedure to show me that at the start of the lab class, so that I know that you've had a go at it. So if you give yourself an hour and it takes 20 minutes, like I said, have a nap for 40 minutes. It's not wasted time. But give yourself about an hour to get that done, and you'll be fine. The other thing to keep in mind, in this composition book, you're going to collect your data directly into that lab notebook. It is not transferred afterwards. You might consider what tables you're going to want before you get to the lab and rule those up. The big thing you don't want to be doing is don't record data onto a printout of the report or onto scratch paper. And sometimes people are hiding this, printout of the report or their scratch paper because they don't want to miss it. Just do the right thing. If you were ever in a industrial or commercial lab or a university lab and people were seeing that you weren't writing your scientific data directly into a lab notebook in pen, that jeopardizes the whole project, because people are going to be questioning is that a legitimate record of the data of the experiment as it was occurring. So this is, especially in the current climate, this is like really, really critical. This could delay, a project or wreck a whole bunch of other people's research, So it is important. It goes directly into the lab notebook. When we were doing labs in pairs, we would have spaces in the lab notebooks where your partner could sign saying that they had witnessed you do the work, right? So it's part of scientific integrity that data is directly recorded into the lab notebook. Okay, so that's the last. That's the kind of the overview of this. That's the overview complete for sort of getting started with in-person labs, and then my intention is to post pretty quickly another video that has an overview of what's required of the lab notebook.